He leaves his blind sister out in the snow and walks away. A white horse emerges from the forest and lays down beside her. But first, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any emotional stories. Thank you. Now, let's get back to our story. Ethan Blackwood stood at the frost-covered window of Blackwood Manor, watching his breath form small clouds against the glass. Outside, the Montana mountains loomed dark and imposing, their peaks already dusted with early snow. At 23, he carried himself with the practiced stillness of someone who had never been allowed to be young. The vast estate sprawled around him like a kingdom. 5,000 acres of prime Montana land, timber rights, oil interests, and the historic manor house with its 22 rooms of polished oak and ancestral portraits. "Mr. Blackwood," the voice came from behind him, tentative and soft. "The doctor is leaving now." Ethan didn't turn. "Did he say anything new?" "No, sir. Just that the baby's condition remains stable, but her blindness is permanent." The last word hung in the air, unwanted and heavy. Ethan nodded once, dismissing the housekeeper without looking at her. When the door clicked shut, he allowed his shoulders to drop. 3 months since his mother's passing. 3 months since he'd inherited everything, the estate, the businesses, the responsibilities, and a newborn half-sister he never asked for. His mother's final, desperate attempt at happiness with a man who disappeared the moment the pregnancy was announced. A man Ethan had warned her about. A child born blind, fragile, and now entirely his burden to bear. In the east wing, behind a heavy oak door, the nursery stood bathed in muted light. Ethan approached the crib with measured steps, his Italian leather shoes silent against the Persian rug. Standing over the sleeping infant, he felt nothing of the tenderness others claimed came naturally when looking at a baby. Instead, there was only a cold calculation of cost and inconvenience. "Lily," he murmured the name his mother had chosen, testing its weight on his tongue. The child stirred slightly but didn't wake. Her eyes, though closed now, were a cloudy blue when open, beautiful but unseeing. The doctors had explained the condition with terms like congenital and optic nerve development, but all Ethan heard was permanent and special care required. He had already lost so much to this child. His mother's final year had been consumed with anxiety over the pregnancy, her weak heart taxed beyond its limits. Now his freedom was being eaten away by the constant demands of this tiny, helpless creature. The manor's telephone rang, its shrill sound slicing through the quiet evening. Ethan left the nursery without a backward glance. "Yes, this is Ethan Blackwood." His voice transformed instantly, confident, authoritative, the voice that commanded boardrooms in Helena and closed million-dollar deals in Billings. "Mr. Blackwood, it's James Parker from Everest Partners. We've been reviewing your proposal for the timber acquisition." Ethan smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. This was his world. Numbers, negotiations, power plays, not diapers and formula and doctor's appointments. "James, I'm glad you called. I'm assuming the board has come to their senses." The conversation flowed easily, a rhythm of offers and counter-offers. When he hung up 20 minutes later, the deal was sealed. Another $30 million in assets added to the Blackwood portfolio. That evening, as the Montana sky darkened to indigo, Ethan sat in his father's old study reviewing the manor's staff. 8 full-time employees to maintain the house and grounds, none hired for childcare. "Mrs. Henderson," he called, summoning the housekeeper with a press of the intercom button. She appeared moments later, hands folded at her waist. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." "The baby needs a caretaker. Do any of the staff have experience with infants?" Mrs. Henderson's lips pursed slightly. "Well, sir, Abigail in the kitchen has 5 children of her own, but she's only part-time." And Jenny, the new girl who helps with cleaning, mentioned she used to babysit, but she's very young herself. Ethan nodded, making a note. Assign Jenny to care for my sister, full-time. But sir, she has no formal training, especially not. For a child with special needs, she'll learn. Ethan cut her off. Arrange a room for her in the East Wing near the nursery. Yes, sir. Mrs. Henderson hesitated. The doctor left some information about specialists in Helena, schools for visually impaired children, early intervention programs. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. That won't be necessary yet. She's only an infant. After the housekeeper left, Ethan poured himself 3 fingers of his father's 30-year-old scotch. The liquor burned pleasantly as he swallowed, warming him from the inside in a way nothing else seemed to anymore. The package on his desk, delivered by courier that morning, caught his attention. Inside was an invitation to the exclusive Whitefish Winter Retreat, 4 days of skiing, networking, and luxury at Montana's most prestigious mountain resort. A chance to escape the suffocating walls of Blackwood Manor, to breathe air untainted by responsibility and regret. He picked up the phone again and dialed. Daniel, it's Ethan. Count me in for Whitefish next weekend. Yes, all 4 days. As November deepened, so did the cold. The rolling hills surrounding Blackwood Manor disappeared under fresh snow almost daily. The skeleton crew Ethan had maintained since his mother's passing struggled to keep the long driveway clear and the pipes from freezing. Costs needed to be cut, he'd explained to Mrs. Henderson when letting go of 3 groundskeepers and the full-time maintenance man. The manor's upkeep was bleeding money, and sentimentality was a luxury Ethan couldn't afford. In the East Wing, Jenny struggled with her new responsibilities. At 19, she had only the vaguest notions of childcare, gathered from occasionally watching her neighbor's children. A blind baby requiring special attention was far beyond her experience. Mr. Blackwood. She approached him tentatively one evening as he reviewed financial statements in the library. The baby's been fussy all day. I think she might be sick. She feels warm. Ethan glanced up, irritated by the interruption. Have you given her medicine? I don't know what's safe to give a baby, sir. He sighed, setting down his pen. Call Dr. Weber in the morning if she's still warm. But sir, it's 3 days until morning, and she's crying something awful. Then find a way to quiet her, Ethan snapped. That's what you're being paid for. The young woman flinched but nodded, disappearing back toward the East Wing. The baby's distant cries eventually faded, or perhaps they were simply swallowed by the vastness of the manor. 2 days before the Whitefish Retreat, Montana's weather took a dangerous turn. What had started as a typical November snowfall developed into what the local radio was calling the storm of the decade. Roads were closing across the county, and the governor was considering a state of emergency for the northern regions. Ethan stood at his office window, watching the darkening sky with growing concern, not for the safety of the manor or its occupants, but for his plans. The retreat was non-refundable, and more importantly, Carolyn Blake would be there, the heiress to Blake Oil, and the woman Ethan had been strategically pursuing for months. A merger with Blake Oil would double the Blackwood holdings overnight. Sir, Mrs. Henderson knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her usual decorum strained by obvious worry. The Weather Service is advising everyone to stay home for the next 3 days. They're saying it could drop to 20 below with the wind chill. I'm aware, Ethan replied coolly. We need to prepare. The East Wing's heating isn't reliable. In extreme weather, we should move the baby to a room near the main furnace. Fine, Ethan said dismissively. Handle it as you see fit. And sir, Jenny is asking about the baby's fever again. It's gotten worse. Ethan checked his watch impatiently. Where's Dr. Weber? He called, sir. He can't make it out until the road's clear. For the first time, a flicker of genuine concern crossed Ethan's face. Not for the child, but for the complication this presented to his plans. A sick infant, a skeleton staff, and a historic blizzard approaching, all conspiring to trap him at Blackwood Manor when he needed to be in Whitefish. Charming Carolyn Blake. "Sir?" Mrs. Henderson prompted. "Tell Jenny to bring the baby to my study. I'll look at her myself." 15 minutes later, Ethan found himself holding his half-sister for only the second time since her birth. She was indeed warm to the touch, her tiny face flushed, her cloudy blue eyes opened, but fixed on nothing, staring past his shoulder at some invisible point. "It's probably just a cold," he said, handing the whimpering bundle back to Jenny. "Keep her hydrated and comfortable until the doctor can get here." That night, as the first heavy bands of snow began to pummel the windows, Ethan made his decision. He would leave for Whitefish at first light, before the roads became completely impassable. The staff could handle one sick infant for a few days. Some opportunities couldn't be missed, and he'd sacrificed too much already to the unexpected burden of his sister's existence. As he packed his expensive ski gear and pressed his finest suits, the wind outside strengthened, howling around the eaves of Blackwood Manor like a warning none of its occupants were wise enough to heed. Dawn arrived reluctantly, the sun a pale suggestion. Behind thick clouds heavy with snow, Ethan moved through the manor with quiet efficiency, loading his luggage into the heated garage where his Range Rover waited. The forecast scrolling across his phone showed a narrow window, perhaps 4 hours before the storm intensified again. Enough time to reach the main highway if he left immediately. In the kitchen, Mrs. Henderson was already awake, her face drawn with worry as she prepared a thermos of coffee. "You're still planning to leave, Mr. Blackwood?" She couldn't quite mask the disapproval in her voice. "It's an important meeting," Ethan replied, accepting the thermos. "I'll be back in 4 days. The staff can manage until then." Mrs. Henderson's lips thinned. "Jenny says the baby's fever hasn't broken. I've tried calling Dr. Weber again, but the lines are down in his area." Ethan paused, his gloved hand on the door. A flicker of something, not quite conscience, but perhaps its distant relative, made him hesitate. "What about the medicine cabinet? Surely there's children's fever reducer somewhere in this house." "We've looked, sir. Your mother's medications were all disposed of after her passing, and no one thought to stock children's medicine." She hesitated. "The baby needs a doctor, Mr. Blackwood." The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken judgment. Finally, Ethan reached for his wallet, extracting several $100 bills. "Here, when the road's clear, get whatever supplies are needed, and double Jenny's pay for the week." He placed the money on the counter, as if the additional inches between his hand and Mrs. Henderson's might absolve him of responsibility. The housekeeper didn't reach for it. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No. I'll call when I reach Whitefish." Outside, the wind sliced through his expensive wool coat as if it were cotton. The garage door opened automatically, revealing a world transformed into blinding white. Ethan backed the Range Rover down the cleared portion of the driveway, the tires crunching on fresh snow despite the groundskeeper's earlier efforts. He should have felt relief as the manor grew smaller in his rearview mirror, but instead an unfamiliar discomfort settled in his chest. He adjusted the heater, turned up the radio, and pressed harder on the accelerator. By nightfall, he'd be enjoying a Manhattan in front of a resort fireplace, the weight of Blackwood Manor temporarily lifted from his shoulders. 3 miles from the property's main gate, where the private road merged with the county highway, Ethan's phone lost service. The screen flickered to no signal, just as the radio announcer's voice crackled through a static-filled weather update. "Emergency vehicles only. All residents advised to shelter in place." Ethan switched off the radio, his jaw set. He'd driven in Montana winters all his life. His vehicle was top of the line, with all the latest safety features. The main highway would be plowed regularly, regardless of the storm warnings. The baby's flushed face flashed in his memory, but he pushed the image away. Jenny would manage. Mrs. Henderson was being dramatic. Children got fevers all the time. At Blackwood Manor, the skeleton staff gathered in the main kitchen, their faces mirroring the grey light filtering through the windows. Without Ethan present, the hierarchy dissolved, leaving them to make decisions beyond their usual responsibilities. He just left? Abigail, the part-time cook who had come in despite the weather, shook her head in disbelief. With the baby this sick? Mrs. Henderson's mouth was a thin line. He said he had an important meeting. Jenny stood in the doorway, the bundled infant in her arms. Lily's cries had weakened to whimpers, her breathing quick and shallow. Her fever's getting higher. I've been using cold washcloths, but it's not helping much. Let me see her. Abigail approached, her weathered hands gentle as she felt the baby's forehead. Lord above, she's burning up. We need to cool her down properly, and she needs medicine. The medicine cabinet is empty, and the roads to town are closed, Mrs. Henderson replied. Mr. Blackwood left money to buy supplies when the roads clear, but when the roads clear could be days from now, Abigail finished grimly. This little one doesn't have days. The group fell silent, the only sound the howling wind and Lily's weak whimpers. Finally, the groundskeeper, an older man named Samuel, who'd worked for the Blackwood family for nearly 30 years, cleared his throat. There's old Doc Hayden. Lives about 2 miles down the valley, keeps a small clinic in his house, been the local doctor for 40 years before he retired. Might have something that could help. 2 miles in this? Mrs. Henderson gestured toward the window, where snow was now falling so heavily the nearby trees were mere shadows. I could try to get the plow truck through, Samuel offered, but the drifts on the back road are probably chest high by now. Jenny looked down at the feverish child in her arms, then back up at the others. What about the greenhouse? It's got that wood stove, right? We could keep her warm there while someone tries to reach Dr. Hayden. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. The greenhouse is closer to the valley road, too. If we can get her stable there, it might be easier for help to reach us. The greenhouse stood at the edge of the formal gardens, a Victorian glass structure that had once been Mrs. Blackwood's pride. Though neglected since her passing, it retained its beauty, iron and glass rising in elegant arches, capturing what little sunlight penetrated the storm clouds. Inside, Samuel worked quickly to light the old wood stove, while Abigail arranged blankets on a garden bench. The temperature inside the greenhouse was already warmer than outside, protected from the wind, but still far from comfortable for a sick infant. We need to keep her fever from spiking any higher, Abigail instructed as Jenny laid Lily on the makeshift bed. Samuel, do you think you can make it to Doc Hayden's? The old groundskeeper looked out at the worsening storm. I can try. Might take hours, but I'll try. Oh, as Samuel prepared to leave, bundling himself in every layer he could find, Jenny sat beside the feverish baby, her young face tight with worry. I should never have taken this job. I don't know the first thing about taking care of a sick baby, especially one with special needs. Mrs. Henderson placed a hand on her shoulder. None of this is your fault. You've done your best with what you were given. Outside, the wind changed direction, driving snow horizontally against the greenhouse glass. The sound was like tiny fingers tapping, asking to be let in. I'll be back as soon as I can, Samuel promised, zipping his heavy coat to his chin. Keep that stove going. After he left, the 3 women settled into a routine, taking turns adding wood to the stove and bathing Lily's forehead with cool cloths. The baby's cries grew weaker, her breathing more labored. As darkness fell, the temperature in the greenhouse began to drop, despite the stove's efforts. We need more wood, Mrs. Henderson realized, looking at their dwindling supply. I'll go back to the house and bring what I can carry. I'll help, Abigail offered. "Jenny, you stay with the baby." Jenny nodded, drawing Lily closer to her chest. "Hurry back, it's getting colder." Alone with the infant, Jenny felt a creeping panic. The greenhouse, previously cozy, now seemed isolated and exposed. The glass walls, meant to capture light, now only emphasized their vulnerability to the elements. Beyond the fogged panes, the storm had transformed the familiar grounds into an alien landscape, all landmarks erased by swirling white. "It's okay, Lily," she whispered, though she knew the baby couldn't hear or understand her. "Help is coming. You just need to hang on." Oh, but as minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of the others, Jenny began to wonder if they'd gotten lost in the whiteout conditions. The wood supply was nearly gone. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Lily's breathing had become so shallow it was barely perceptible. In desperation, Jenny made a decision that would later haunt her. Wrapping Lily in every available blanket, she placed the bundle near the stove where the last embers still provided some warmth. Then she headed for the door, intending to follow the others' tracks back to the main house for more wood before they disappeared completely under fresh snow. "I'll be right back," she promised the silent bundle. 5 minutes, that's all. Outside, the full force of the storm hit her like a physical blow. The wind knocked her sideways, and snow immediately coated her eyelashes, making it almost impossible to see. What should have been a clear path back to the manor was now an indistinguishable white void. Jenny took 3 steps, then 5, then realized with growing horror that she could no longer see the greenhouse behind her. Panic seized her. She turned in what she thought was the direction of the greenhouse, then the opposite way, searching for any familiar shape in the blinding snow. The wind seemed to come from all directions at once, disorienting her further. Her feet, already numb, stumbled on hidden obstacles beneath the snow. When she fell the first time, she struggled back up. The second time, staying down seemed easier. The cold was beginning to feel almost warm, a dangerous comfort settling over her as hypothermia took hold. Her last conscious thought was of the tiny baby she'd left alone, another failure in a life that had contained too many already. Inside the abandoned greenhouse, the last log in the stove collapsed into embers. The temperature continued to drop as night deepened. The tiny bundle near the stove remained motionless, the only movement the soft rise and fall of the blanket with each shallow breath. Outside, something moved through the snow, a pale shape, almost invisible against the white backdrop. It approached. The greenhouse with careful steps, steam rising from its nostrils in the frigid air. A white horse, tall and powerful, its coat thickened for winter, moved with surprising grace through the deep drifts. The mare had once been part of the Blackwood stables, a gift for Ethan's 20th birthday that he'd rarely ridden. When budget cuts came after Mrs. Blackwood's passing, the stables were the first to go. Most of the horses were sold, but this one, Alabaster they'd called her, had escaped during transfer, bolting into the foothills that bordered the property. For months, there had been occasional sightings of her, running wild with a small herd of mustangs that roamed the less developed areas of the county. Now, she stood outside the greenhouse, her ears pricked forward, listening. Something had drawn her back to this place, some animal instinct more reliable than human reason. Through the glass walls, she could see the small bundle near the dying fire. Perhaps it was the scent of the baby or some primal recognition of vulnerability, but the white mare circled the greenhouse, searching. At the far end, where a delivery door had been left partially ajar by Jenny in her haste, Alabaster nudged her way inside. The space was barely large enough for her massive frame, but she managed, her hooves surprisingly delicate on the stone floor. Inside, the temperature was falling rapidly, the last of the stove's heat dissipating into the Montana night. The mare approached the bundle of blankets, lowering her head to investigate. Her breath warm and moist, fogged in the cold air as she gently nudged the layers of fabric. Then, with the careful movements of a creature who somehow understood the fragility of what lay before her, Alabaster lowered herself to the ground. Beside the makeshift bed, the mare's body, radiating the natural heat of a 1,000-pound animal, curled protectively around the bundle. Her neck stretched out, creating a windbreak against the drafts that seeped through the greenhouse seams. Through the long hours of that Montana night, as the storm reached its peak and the temperature outside plummeted to 15 below, the white horse remained vigilant, her body a living furnace keeping death at bay. 2 miles down the valley, Samuel had reached Doc Hayden's house, collapsing on the old physician's porch with his message. By dawn, they had assembled a makeshift rescue party, Doc Hayden, 2 neighbors with a snowmobile, and Samuel, recovered enough to guide them back. They fought through drifts taller than a man, following the nearly invisible track that led to Blackwood Manor. They found Mrs. Henderson and Abigail first, huddled together in a small equipment shed halfway between the manor and the greenhouse, disoriented from cold but alive. Jenny was discovered shortly after, half buried in snow but breathing, her body temperature dangerously low. Doc Hayden immediately began treatment for severe hypothermia, his ancient hands still steady as he worked. "The baby," Jenny managed to whisper through blue-tinged lips. Greenhouse left her. She'd tried to get help. Samuel's face went ashen. The stove would have gone out hours ago. In this cold, Doc Hayden looked grim, but determined. "Get the snowmobile as close to the greenhouse as you can," he instructed one of the neighbors. "There's still a chance." The neighbor, a rancher named Mike who'd known the Blackwood family for generations, nodded grimly and set off. 20 minutes later, he stood at the greenhouse door, steeling himself for what he expected to find inside. The glass structure, beautiful in summer, now resembled a tomb of ice, its panes frosted over, no sign of heat or life within. Mike pushed open the door, the hinges protesting with a sound like breaking glass. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the center of the greenhouse, lay Alabaster, her white coat almost glowing in the dim light, and nestled against her side, wrapped in blankets, and visibly breathing, was the baby. The mare raised her head at his entrance but didn't flee. Her dark eyes watched him approach, alert but unafraid. When he knelt beside her, she allowed him to gently pull back the blankets, revealing Lily's face, no longer flushed with fever, but peaceful in sleep. "My God," Mike whispered, his voice cracking. Doc Hayden, get in here! She's alive!" In the hours that followed, as Doc Hayden tended to the infant and the others recovered at the manor, the story of Alabaster's return spread through the small rescue party like a flame, warming them as thoroughly as the coffee Mrs. Henderson managed to brew on the kitchen's gas stove. "That horse disappeared 6 months ago," Samuel said, shaking his head in wonder. "Everyone thought she'd gone wild for good. Then she shows up, right when and where she's needed most." Doc Hayden, his weathered face grave as he monitored Lily's condition, merely nodded. In 60 years of practicing medicine in Montana's unforgiving landscape, he'd seen things that defied explanation, moments when the line between coincidence and miracle blurred. This, he thought as he watched the white mare standing sentinel outside the kitchen window, refusing to leave despite offers of shelter, might be one of those moments. "The fever's breaking," he announced finally, his gnarled fingers gentle on Lily's cheek. "She's not out of the woods yet, but I believe she'll pull through." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to abate, the wind dying down to occasional gusts. Through breaks in the clouds, weak sunlight illuminated a transformed landscape, pristine, dangerous, beautiful. And at the edge of the kitchen garden, clearly visible through the window, Alabaster stood watching, her white coat almost luminous against the snow, as if keeping vigil until she was certain her charge would survive. Ethan Blackwood's Range Rover sat abandoned at the junction of County Road 23 and the highway, buried under 2 feet of snow. Inside, his phone lay dead on. The passenger seat, his cashmere coat still draped over the headrest. The vehicle had been spotted by a highway patrol snowplow 3 days into the storm, but conditions made recovery impossible until now, a week later. Sheriff Dave Miller supervised as the tow truck hooked up to the luxury SUV. "Any sign of the driver?" he asked the patrol officer. "None, sir. Probably got a ride with someone passing by before the worst hit." Sheriff Miller nodded, though something about the situation bothered him. He'd known the Blackwoods for years, not personally, but in the way small-town authorities knew the wealthy families who summered or wintered in their jurisdiction. Ethan Blackwood didn't strike him as the type to hitch a ride with strangers, abandoning his $80,000 vehicle. "Put out an alert to check if he made it to Whitefish," Miller instructed. "Just to be safe." The sheriff's instincts proved correct. A quick call to the Whitefish Mountain Resort confirmed that Ethan Blackwood had never checked in for his reservation. When Miller tried calling Blackwood Manor, the line was busy. Duty compelled him to drive out himself, following the snowplow that was finally clearing the back roads a week after the historic blizzard. What he found at Blackwood Manor was chaos of a carefully controlled variety. News vans from Helena and Billings lined the newly plowed driveway. A Child Protective Services vehicle was parked near the front entrance. Inside, raised voices echoed through the normally hushed halls. "Sheriff Miller," Mrs. Henderson greeted, him at the door, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Thank goodness you're here." "What's happening?" Miller asked, removing his hat as he stepped into the foyer. "We found Mr. Blackwood's vehicle abandoned, but no sign of him." Mrs. Henderson's expression tightened. "He's been found. A trucker picked him up on the highway and took him all the way to Whitefish. He's been staying at the resort this whole time, unaware of everything." "Everything?" Miller prompted. Before she could answer, a sharp voice cut across the foyer. "Sheriff, just the man I need to see." A woman in her 50s approached, her manner brisk and professional. "Margaret Watson, Child Protective Services. I need to know if your department is planning to file charges." Miller blinked, caught off guard. "Charges? For what?" "Ms." Watson's eyebrows rose. "You haven't been briefed. We're investigating a case of child endangerment and neglect involving the infant Lily Blackwood." Over the next hour, in the Manor's library, Sheriff Miller listened as the full story unfolded. How Ethan had left his sick sister in the care of inexperienced staff during a deadly storm. How the baby had nearly died of exposure when the desperate young caretaker tried to get help. How a horse, a wild horse by all accounts, had somehow saved the child's life. "It's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen," Doc Hayden told him, his voice gruff with emotion. "That mare kept that baby alive in temperatures that would have killed a grown man in hours, kept her fever from spiking too somehow. Body heat, I suppose, but still." The old doctor shook his head, lost for scientific explanation. "And where is Mr. Blackwood now?" Miller asked. "Upstairs with his lawyer," Mrs. Henderson replied, her tone making it clear what she thought of that arrangement. "He arrived an hour ago. Hasn't even asked to see Lily yet." In the upstairs study, Ethan paced the length of the Persian rug, his face ashen. Across from him, Walter Griggs, the Blackwood family attorney for 3 generations, sat reviewing documents with a grim expression. "This is bad, Ethan. Very bad. Child endangerment is a felony in Montana. The press is already running with the story. They're calling it the miracle at Blackwood Manor. The horse angle has captured the public's imagination. People as far away as Seattle are following this." Ethan stopped pacing. "So fix it. That's what we pay you for." Griggs set down his papers. "Some things can't be fixed with money or legal maneuvering. There are 4 witnesses who say you knew. The baby was sick when you left. You placed your personal desires above your legal duty as her guardian. The staff's statements are damning. They're servants, Ethan snapped. Their word against mine. It's not just their word. It's the abandoned vehicle, the resort booking, the doctor's testimony about the baby's condition. Griggs sighed heavily. And it's the photos. What photos? Griggs slid a newspaper across the desk. On the front page was an image that made Ethan's blood run cold. The white mare standing beside a makeshift bed in the greenhouse, the tiny bundle clearly visible against her flank. The headline read, "Horse Heroics, Abandoned Infant Saved by Equine Guardian Angel." "That's tomorrow's Billings Gazette," Griggs said quietly. "It's gone national, Ethan. People love stories about animals saving babies. They hate stories about rich men abandoning them." Before Ethan could respond, a knock came at the door. Sheriff Miller entered without waiting for permission, his weathered face professionally neutral. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to ask you a few questions about the events of last week." Ethan straightened, composing his features into the mask of confidence he wore in business negotiations. "Of course, Sheriff. Though I must say, this whole situation has been blown out of proportion. I left my sister in the care of my staff during what was supposed to be a brief business trip. The unexpected severity of the storm is hardly my fault." Sheriff Miller's expression didn't change. "Your sister was running a high fever when you left. Your staff says they informed you of this. A slight temperature. Children get those all the time. You made no arrangements for medical care. I left money for medicine. Money that couldn't be used because the roads were closed, as predicted by every weather service in the state." Ethan's mask slipped slightly. "I couldn't have known how bad it would get. Every radio station and TV channel in Montana was broadcasting emergency warnings," Miller countered evenly. "The governor had declared a state of emergency for our county the night before you left." The questioning continued for nearly an hour, Griggs interjecting occasionally with legal cautions, Miller relentlessly building a case with the patience of a man who'd conducted hundreds of interrogations. By the end, even Ethan understood the gravity of his situation. "So what happens now?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "That depends," Miller replied. "The district attorney will review the case. But I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood, child endangerment cases tend to stir strong emotions in rural communities like ours. Juries don't look kindly on them." After the sheriff left, Ethan collapsed into his father's leather chair, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. "This can't be happening," he whispered. Griggs gathered his papers quietly. "I suggest you go see your sister, Ethan. Show some remorse. It might not help legally, but it's the decent thing to do." But Ethan couldn't bring himself to face the tiny person who had unwittingly become the catalyst for his downfall. Instead, he retreated deeper into the manor, avoiding the stream of officials, reporters, and concerned community members who continued to arrive throughout the day. By evening, a new crisis emerged. The phone call came from New York. Blackwood Enterprises' major investors were panicking. The story had reached the financial press. Stocks were falling. Board members were calling for an emergency meeting to discuss Ethan's future with the company. "They can't remove me," Ethan raged into the phone. "I own controlling interest." "Not anymore," his financial advisor explained patiently. "The trust your father established dilutes your control if certain behavioral clauses are triggered. I think this qualifies, don't you?" As night fell on Blackwood Manor, Ethan stood once more at the frost-covered window where our story began. But now, instead of surveying his domain with cold calculation, he watched helplessly as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Outside, near the greenhouse where Lily had nearly died, a small group had gathered. Doc Hayden was there, checking the baby who now rested comfortably in the arms of a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson stood nearby, along with several neighbors who had joined the rescue efforts, and at the edge of the group, still maintaining a watchful distance, stood Alabaster, her white coat glowing in the gathering darkness. The scene looked almost biblical in the twilight. The child, the gathering of witnesses, the animal standing sentinel. Ethan turned away, unable to bear the sight of what his actions had wrought. 2 days later, an emergency custody hearing was convened in the Madison County Courthouse. Despite Griggs' best efforts, the judge was unmoved by legal arguments about Ethan's rights as guardian. "The facts of this case are disturbing," Judge Marion Winters declared, her voice carrying through the packed courtroom. Mr. Blackwood abdicated his responsibility in the most fundamental way possible, placing his own convenience above the life of a vulnerable child in his care. She shuffled the papers before her, then looked directly at Ethan. "I am awarding temporary custody of Lily Blackwood to Eleanor Reed, who has petitioned the court and demonstrated both the means and the compassion to care for a child with special needs." Ethan's head snapped up at the name. Eleanor Reed, his mother's closest friend, a widow who lived in the small arts community on the other side of the valley, a woman his father had always dismissed as eccentric, but whom his mother had loved dearly. "Your Honor," Griggs began to protest, but Judge Winters cut him off. "This is a temporary arrangement, Mr. Griggs. Your client will have an opportunity to demonstrate his fitness as a guardian at a later date, should he wish to contest permanent placement. For now, the welfare of the child is this court's primary concern." As the gavel fell, sealing the decision, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Ethan sat motionless, the full weight of what was happening finally penetrating the armor of entitlement. He'd worn his entire life. Eleanor Reed approached him outside the courthouse, Lily bundled carefully in her arms. The older woman's face was neither triumphant nor accusatory, merely resolved. "She has your mother's chin," Eleanor said quietly, adjusting the blanket so Ethan could see his sister's face. "And her determination. She's a fighter, this one." Ethan couldn't meet her eyes or look at the baby. "I never wanted this responsibility," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "No one ever does, not really," Eleanor replied. "Responsibility chooses us, not the other way around. Your mother understood that." "What will happen to her?" Ethan asked, finally looking at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. Lily's cloudy blue eyes moved sightlessly, but her expression was peaceful. "She'll live with me in the cottage on Willow Creek. It's small but warm. There's a good school for visually impaired children in Bozeman, just a 30-minute drive away. She'll have what she needs." Ethan nodded, unable to form words around the unfamiliar tightness in his throat. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor added, her voice gentle despite the circumstances. "The horse, Alabaster, I believe she was called. She's been following us everywhere since the storm, won't leave Lily's side for more than a few minutes. Doc Hayden says he's never seen anything like it." "What are you going to do with her?" Ethan asked. "Do with her? Nothing. She's chosen her person, it seems. I have 10 acres, mostly fenced. She'll have a home with us if that's what she wants." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "You could visit, you know, when you're ready. She is your sister." But Ethan wasn't ready. Not then, perhaps not ever. As Eleanor walked away with Lily, he felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. Something essential had been taken from him, yet the burden that had been lifted was undeniable. That evening, as a light snow began to fall on Madison County, Eleanor Reed arrived at her cottage with her precious new charge. The modest home, with its river rock chimney and wide porch, stood in sharp contrast to the grandeur of Blackwood Manor. But it was warm, filled with books and art, and the collected treasures of a life well lived. In the small pasture behind the cottage, Alabaster had somehow arrived ahead of them. The white mare stood at the fence, steam rising from her nostrils in the cold air, watching as Eleanor carried Lily inside. "She'll need a proper stable before winter sets in again," Eleanor murmured, glancing back at the horse as she opened her front door. "And you'll need a proper room, little one. But for tonight, this will do." Inside, Eleanor laid Lily in a bassinet she'd hastily purchased that morning. The baby cooed softly, her tiny hands waving in the air. Though blind, she seemed to sense the change in her surroundings, the smaller space, the crackling fire, the absence of echoing hallways and cold marble floors. Eleanor sat beside the bassinet, gently stroking Lily's cheek. "Your mother was my dearest friend," she whispered. "She'd be happy to know you're here with me, and someday, when he's ready, perhaps your brother will be part of your life too." Outside, Alabaster circled the small pasture once, twice, then settled near the cottage window, her white form visible through the glass. Even as night deepened and the temperature dropped, she remained, a pale guardian against the darkness. In the weeks that followed, as winter maintained its grip on Montana, the story of Lily Blackwood and her equine savior spread far beyond Madison County. Newspapers from Seattle to New York picked up the tale, embellishing it with each retelling until it took on the quality of legend. The public's fascination with the miracle mare, as Alabaster was now called, showed no signs of fading. For Ethan, the consequences mounted steadily. The board of Blackwood Enterprises voted to remove him as CEO, citing moral turpitude clauses in the company charter. Criminal charges were filed, then reduced through Griggs' legal maneuvering to misdemeanors, carrying heavy fines but no jail time. The court ordered counseling, community service, parenting classes, a litany of requirements that felt like both punishment and mockery to a man who had never valued connection. Most painful, perhaps, was the social ostracism. Montana's elite, once eager for his attention and investment, now avoided him at the few functions he still attended. Invitations dried up. Business associates found urgent reasons to cancel meetings. The Blackwood name, once a golden key to the state's highest circles, had become tarnished beyond recognition. Yet as winter slowly released its grip on the land, something unexpected began to stir within Ethan Blackwood. Standing alone in the too large manor, surrounded by possessions that suddenly seemed meaningless, he found himself drawn repeatedly to the photographs of his mother that lined the study walls. In her eyes, kind but resolute, he searched for answers to questions he'd never before thought to ask. What had she seen in the world that he had missed? What connections had she valued that he had dismissed? And why, in her final months, had she chosen to bring a new life into the world, knowing she might not survive to guide it? As spring's first tentative warmth began to soften the Montana landscape, Ethan found himself driving past Eleanor Reed's cottage with increasing frequency. He never stopped, never approached, but sometimes from the road he would catch a glimpse of a white horse in the small pasture or hear the distant laughter of a child who couldn't possibly be old enough to laugh yet, sounds that both haunted and beckoned him toward a future he couldn't yet imagine. 5 years passed, marking the Montana landscape with seasons of change. Blackwood Manor remained standing, though diminished somehow, its grandeur fading like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Ethan Blackwood still lived there, though the vast space felt increasingly hollow, a mausoleum to ambitions that had crumbled under the weight of consequence. 10 miles away, Eleanor Reed's cottage had expanded modestly. A small addition with wide windows facing east now housed a bedroom specially designed for a visually impaired child. The backyard boasted a carefully constructed playground, and the once empty pasture now contained a proper stable, weathered to a soft gray that matched the surrounding pines. On this particular May morning, 5-year-old Lily Blackwood sat on a wooden stool in the stable, her small hand extended toward Alabaster's velvet muzzle. The white mare, now aging gracefully with streaks of gray in her mane, stood perfectly still, as tiny fingers explored the contours of her face. "You're getting whiter," Lily observed, her voice clear and confident. Though her eyes remained cloudy, blue and unseeing, she had developed an extraordinary facility with her other senses. "Soon, you'll be the color of snow again." Eleanor watched from the stable doorway. "Lily's right, old girl," she called softly. "You're showing your age just like me." As they shared breakfast on the porch, Eleanor noticed Alabaster trotting toward the road, her head high and alert. Looking out, she saw a black Range Rover moving slowly up Willow Creek Road. It pulled over opposite the driveway, idling there as if the driver was debating whether to turn in. Alabaster remained at the end of the drive, watching. Finally, the driver's door opened and Ethan Blackwood stepped out. He looked different than Eleanor remembered. Thinner, the sharp edges of his once imposing presence somehow softened. He stood beside his vehicle, one hand resting on the door, his gaze fixed on the white horse standing sentry at the entrance to the property. Ethan took a few steps toward Alabaster, his hand extended cautiously. The mare watched him approach, but made no move to retreat after what seemed an eternity. Alabaster turned and began walking back toward the cottage, pausing to look over her shoulder as if expecting Ethan to follow. After a moment's hesitation, he did. Eleanor met them at the garden gate. "Ethan," she said simply. "Eleanor," he replied, his voice hoarse. I hope I'm not intruding." "That depends on why you're here." Ethan swallowed visibly. I needed to see her." The front door opened, and Miss Parker emerged with Lily beside her, the child's hand resting on her teacher's arm for guidance. "Aunt Ellie?" Lily called, her head turning as she tried to locate Eleanor by sound. "Who's here? I hear someone talking." "Lily, there's someone here who would like to meet you. An old friend." "This is Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor said gently. "Ethan Blackwood." The child's expression grew curious. "Blackwood? That's my name too." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. He's your brother, Lily." Lily's face transformed with surprise and interest. "My brother? The one from the big house on the hill?" Ethan knelt on the step below her. "Yes," he said softly. "I live at Blackwood Manor." Lily's hand reached out, seeking. "May I see you? With my hands?" Ethan took Lily's small hand and guided it to his face. Her touch was feather-light as she explored his features. "You feel sad," she declared finally. "Why are you sad?" "Because I've been away too long," he answered, his voice cracking. "And I've missed so much." Lily considered this, her head tilted thoughtfully. "Aunt Ellie says it's never too late to find your way home." A sound escaped. Ethan, that was half laugh, half sob. "Your Aunt Ellie is very wise." "Would you like to see my garden?" Lily offered. "We were just going for a sensory walk." Eleanor watched as Lily led her brother through the garden, pointing out plants by touch and smell. Alabaster followed a few paces behind, her protective instinct evident in every step. The man walking beside Lily bore little resemblance to the cold, calculating Ethan Blackwood who had abandoned his sister 5 years ago. When they returned to the porch, Lily's small basket was filled with botanical treasures. Smooth stones, rough pine cones, silky flower petals. "Mr. Blackwood has good texture sense," she announced. "He found the smoothest stone in the whole garden." "Will you come back?" Lily asked as Ethan prepared to leave. Eleanor measured her words carefully. "Lily has riding lessons on Saturday mornings. If you'd like to come by then, you could watch. Perhaps stay for lunch afterward." The invitation was cautious, but it was an opening. Ethan's expression flooded with gratitude. "I'd like that very much. Thank you." Lily surprised them both by wrapping her arms around his waist in a quick hug. "Goodbye, brother Ethan. See you Saturday." That Saturday, Ethan arrived at Eleanor's cottage promptly at 9. To his surprise, he was greeted not only by Eleanor and Lily, but by a small gathering of the community members who had become Lily's extended family, Dr. Hayden, Sheriff Miller and his wife, even young Jenny, home from nursing school for the weekend. In the paddock, Alabaster stood saddled and waiting. Lily emerged from the stable wearing a riding helmet, her excitement palpable. "Aunt Ellie, is everyone here?" she called. "I want to show them my posting trot." What followed was extraordinary, a simple riding lesson that would have been unremarkable, except that the small rider was blind, and the horse beneath her seemed to understand this completely. Alabaster moved with exaggerated care, responding to the slightest shift in Lily's weight or the gentlest tug on the reins. Ethan watched in astonishment as his sister confidently guided the 1,000-pound animal around the paddock. When Lily executed a perfect figure eight, her face alight with concentration and joy, he felt something shift within his chest, a loosening of a knot that had been tightening for 5 years. After the lesson, Ethan found himself standing beside Dr. Hayden, both watching Lily as she enthusiastically described her ride. "She's remarkable," Ethan said quietly. Dr. Hayden nodded. "She is. But then she had to be, didn't she? Survival often breeds strength. The horse, Alabaster. I never understood why my mother bought her. I barely rode her." "Animals often find their true purpose in unexpected ways," Dr. Hayden observed. "Much like people, if they're fortunate." "Brother Ethan," Lily called, approaching them. "Aunt Ellie says you can stay for dinner too. We're having pot roast. It's my favorite." "I'd like that very much," he replied. Later that evening, Eleanor and Ethan sat on the porch while Lily prepared for bed. "She's happy," Ethan observed, "despite everything. Children are remarkably resilient when given the chance. She's never lacked for anything essential." "Because of you," Ethan acknowledged. "You've given her what I couldn't or wouldn't." "Why now, Ethan? Why after 5 years?" When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost confessional. "I've spent 5 years trying to rebuild what I lost after the storm, my reputation, my business, my social standing. None of it worked. Nothing filled the emptiness." He looked toward Alabaster's white form in the gathering dusk. "I kept thinking about that night, about what would have happened if that horse hadn't returned." From inside came Lily's voice, calling for Eleanor to read her bedtime story. "Would you like to read to her tonight?" Eleanor asked quietly. Ethan's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "No," Eleanor admitted with a small smile, "but I think it's time we found out." Inside, Lily was already in bed. "Brother Ethan, are you going to read my story tonight?" "If that's all right with you," he replied uncertainly. Lily patted the edge of her bed. "Aunt Ellie always sits right here. The book is on the nightstand. It's about a horse who could fly, not really fly, but run so fast it felt like flying." Ethan began to read, his voice growing steadier with each sentence. By the time he reached the final page, Lily's hand had found his arm, resting there with the easy trust of childhood. Her eyes had drifted closed, her breathing deep and even. When he finally rose and joined Eleanor in the hallway, his cheeks were wet with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "Thank you," he whispered. "This is just a beginning, Ethan, a single step." "I know," he replied, "but it's more than I deserve." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But it's exactly what Lily deserves, a chance to know her brother, the real one, not the broken man who left her in the snow." As summer blossomed, Ethan's visits became regular occurrences. The foundation he established began to take shape, with plans for a center on the Blackwood property that would serve visually impaired children throughout the region. On a perfect Montana evening in late August, Ethan sat with Lily on Eleanor's porch, guiding her fingers over a tactile map of the planned facility. "This will be the main building," he explained, tracing the raised outline. "With classrooms, therapy rooms, a library with braille and audio, books, and will there be horses like Alabaster?" An entire stable full, Ethan promised. Every child who comes there will have the chance to experience what you do with Alabaster. Will you live there too? The question caught Ethan off guard. I haven't decided yet. I thought I might stay at the manor, but it's so far away. And big and empty. Lily's tone was practical. Wouldn't you rather be closer? Then you could read my bedtime story more often. From the doorway, Eleanor suppressed a smile. Ethan met her eyes over Lily's head, a question in his gaze that Eleanor answered with a slight nod. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe it is time for a change. In the pasture, Alabaster raised her head, her ears pricked forward as if listening. The mare's coat glowed in the evening light, a living reminder that love could manifest in unexpected forms, that protection could come from unlikely sources, and that even the coldest heart could thaw under the persistent warmth of connection. As night fell, stars emerged in the vast sky above. Inside, a blind child who had once been abandoned prepared for bed, her world rich with sounds and textures and love. Beside her, reading a story in a voice that grew more confident with each visit, sat a brother learning that true worth had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with the courage to begin again. And outside, a white horse kept watch, her presence a silent testament to the mysterious alchemy that transforms the lead of our worst moments into the gold of our redemption. An alchemy as old as life itself, as enduring as the Montana mountains, and as powerful as the bond between a child and the animal who had saved her life. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Lily and Alabaster has touched your heart. If you found yourself moved by this tale of redemption, protection, and unconditional love, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of humanity's capacity for both darkness and light. Leave a like if Alabaster's unwavering devotion stirred something within you, and share in the comments which moment brought tears to your eyes. Remember, sometimes our greatest protectors come in unexpected forms, and even the coldest hearts can learn to love again.